Setting up your meeting for Facebook Live.
Okay. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Thursday. It's 9 o'clock, so it can only be Coffee Kickstarter. And we, the Property Angels, are back with you this morning. And we're delighted to have with us special guest, Suzi Carter. But quickly, we're just going to introduce ourselves. So as you know, my name's Karen Stanbridge, and I started life as an accountant. Well, somebody has to, right? But I soon saw the light and I escaped that world. Then working in project and program management and strategic business consultancy on programs that had gone very wrong, bringing them back into line, giving them direction, clarity, etc. And I then escaped that world in May 2015, taking with me the skills I'd learned through Cold-Faced Practitioner, and now I leverage those skills within my property business, where I'm building sustainable wealth from the ground to the future. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. Hi, Suzi.
Hi, Sam.
There's three property angels. Firstly, I'll tell you about Sarah Smith. She's currently on maternity leave, but she was the solicitor before being full-time in property. So Sarah's had a full career as a solicitor. And at the same time as that career, she was also a property investor. So she's been a property investor for more than 15 years now, building a portfolio of single lets and HMOs. And it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago she went full-time. And for the last couple of years, she's been streamlining that business, working hard to make it as passive as it possibly can be. So that's what she does now. So it's fairly hands-off her property business. The reason she did that was to enable her to be a full-time mum to her child without having to have the distractions of work. So that's a little bit about Sarah. She'll be back with us when her little one's a bit older. So a little bit about me. I'm Sam Beddoe. My companies, I've got a couple of companies. One is with serviced accommodation and the other one is with property development. That company is Revive Holdings. So I have 12 properties in my serviced accommodation business, so that keeps me pretty occupied. And then the property development business, there's a couple of commercial buildings that are going through purchase at the moment, which will be converted, or the uppers will be, into residential property. I've got experience of a number of property models. For the last 6 years, I've been full-time in property. Prior to that, I was 23 years as a police detective. So my experience in property is with buy-to-lets, HMOs, auctions, title splits, commercial conversion, using SSAS funds, working with private investors, refurbs, commercial conversion, and serviced accommodation. So I've had a variety of experience, and I'm homing in on property development to be my main property model now. So that's a little bit about me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. And now to Suzi. As I said, we're absolutely delighted to have Suzi with us. Suzi has a total wealth of knowledge. But first, let's go right back. So Suzi did a BA in geography, then went on to do a master's in commercial property management. And then in 2001 to 2003, coupled that at Oxford with a postgraduate diploma in management studies and business management. So what a solid background to start from, Suzi.
Yeah, I think I liked exams quite a lot in those days.
And of course, you came out RICS qualified anyhow, which, you know, was fabulous. And, you know, you've been with some really big players, CBRE. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so so first of all, to say that when you leave university with a geography degree, you literally don't know what you want to do with your life. So I kind of zigzagged my way into surveying. My dad's a surveyor, and he suggests from an early age I become a surveyor. And of course, because he was my dad, I said, no, absolutely not. There's no way I'm doing that. And of course, had to find my own way there. So yeah, I started at CBRE fresh from my master's, and it's where I qualified to get my professional qualification. And the very first job I had was working on Regent Street, actually, in London, which was fascinating. So obviously I was part of a larger team because I was a wet behind the ears graduate, but I was the team I was working with, basically in those days, Regent Street, obviously owned by the Crown Estate, was a bit shabby, actually, like really quite shabby. And there was loads of like woolen shops in there, and the facades and the frontages were a bit shabby, and there was some nice units, but it really wasn't the place it is today. And what's really interesting is that together with the Crown Estate, CBRE put together, it was called Hillier Parker in those days, actually, it got bought out by CBRE, but they put together a management plan. So basically put forward a tenant management plan, so that when new tenants were applying, like they had to fit into strict criteria, they had to be of the quality that they wanted. And also when they did their shop fit, you know, they usually put new shop fronts on to fit their kind of corporate image. They had very strict criteria about their shop fronts. And, you know, that was 25 years ago. And, you know, it was a long-term process they were going through. But, you know, it's so lovely to see it today, because actually that was kind of the fruits of the labor 25 years ago, which is great. So so I did that for a bit, and then moved to the offices and industrial team, which in those days was totally unglamorous, like really not very, like we used to call the industrial team the shed heads. And I find it quite amusing now that like industrial is the sexy sector of commercial world. So you know, things have changed. And then I moved into the retail team, and I was doing kind of lease restructuring, rent reviews, lettings in the retail team.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And then after that, you went on to Chartwell Land, and you'd spent some time with B&Q and Land Securities. You've worked with some really major players.
Yeah, I was a little girl from Lancashire, and my dream, I used to watch LA Law, and my dream was to wear a suit in London. Like literally that, I used to go to bed, you know, like now I know a bit more about mindset. I realized that I completely had visualized my future, but I just wanted to be a corporate girl. You know, I just wanted to wear suits and be in London. And I loved it. I absolutely loved the corporate world. And I was really ambitious. And, you know, I worked for Chartwell Land, where I was doing development, and then B&Q, I used to acquire their large stores when they were acquiring them, you know, go through the whole planning process, acquire them, etc. And Landsec as well. But I have to, at Landsec, you know, I ended my career managing an enormous portfolio of shopping centres. But I have to admit,
senior level as well.
Yes, yeah, I was a director at Landsec. But I have to admit, kind of probably 3 to 4 years before I exited the corporate world, I really became massively disillusioned with it. And I don't know whether anybody watching can relate to this, but there was a few things that happened. Obviously you can, Karen, but there's so I'd always wanted to set up my own residential for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but residential investment business. Like it was my just total dream. And I just didn't, looking back, I didn't have the mindset to do it. I just didn't have the balls to jump from the corporate world. And of course you get tied in with bonuses and share schemes, you know, and you're on a massive wage, and, you know, it's, I don't know, you kind of, it feels very difficult to exit the corporate world.
So, no, I can totally relate to that. And it is tough because it's the safety net, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's coming out of the unknown. And it's something I've said before. You're educated to climb the corporate career ladder, right? And you're not taught to be entrepreneurial. And it's almost suppressed the entrepreneurial spirit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, my husband's printing. It's really bad timing. Apologies. So, yeah. So, absolutely it does. Like there isn't, and I do think that if corporates became a bit more entrepreneurial, and I know some corporates do, like, you know, Google's of this world, they kind of embrace failure more, and they, you know, they encourage more people coming forward. You know, I found it's a very male industry, surveying, actually, still. There was more and more women as I worked my way through the ranks. I mean, when I was in my early 30s, so about 15 to 18 years ago, I remember sitting in the ballroom at the Hilton at a Christmas do, and I actually counted 10 women in a room of 1,500 people. You know, that's how few women there were in it. And what I found in the corporate world, you had this group think where, you know, you're in a room and there's so many politics at play, and you kind of sit there and this group think evolves. And I just think that, yeah, corporates just need to absolutely change their attitude. And I wonder whether COVID will do that. It'll be interesting to see, but I suspect not for many organizations. So
I think it falls into two camps, actually, because for COVID, some have really pivoted. Some have allowed home working when they could have done years ago, but others are using it as an excuse for delays. And some people you talk to just naturally aren't the right people to work from home because they get distracted and they say they're finding themselves far less productive. But for others, it's been an amazing experience. So I think it's about balance.
yeah, I totally agree. Like, people ask me a lot about is this the end for offices? And I genuinely believe it's not. I genuinely believe that there is a place for offices. There'll always be headquarters office. People will always want that address as well. But I think hopefully there'll be a bit more balance, because I think people are actually quite liking seeing their kids and they're quite liking seeing their house in the daylight as well. So, it just doesn't feel right anymore to be getting on a train or a tube every day for an hour and just to go to work. It just feels like a ridiculous waste of time, doesn't it?
I know. I don't know how I ever got up so early to go to work.
Exactly. I feel the same.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, wow. So what actually gave you that big push and, helped you really decide, you know what, I can do my own thing. I can set up my own business. I can do consultancy as well. And I can do it all for myself. What was it? What was that light bulb moment that caused that?
Oh, well, there is a story. Slightly opening my soul a little bit, I guess, now, because I'd had this in my mind and I just didn't have the balls to move. But I was increasingly disillusioned, I really was. And then I actually got pregnant with my first son. So I'm quite an older mother. I think they call us very politely elderly primogenitor when you have your first baby over 40, which is a bit depressing. So I decided that I'd basically devoted all my life to my career. Don't get me wrong, it gave me amazing things. Like, I did amazing travels and, I don't regret any of that. I had amazing holidays and all that kind of stuff. But, I hadn't had a break. So I decided I was going to take the full year off maternity leave. And of course, for a corporate, you kind of, you do get a nice maternity leave. I think I was paid for about 6 months or something. So I decided to do that. And of course, at my level, it just wasn't expected that you would do that. At my level, it was definitely expected that after 3 months, you would really be thinking about going back to work. And so I took the year off. At the same time, and this is how the corporate world works, isn't it? That the people who'd sponsored me throughout my career at that organization, they all kind of left. So I was very exposed, politically in the organization. And I don't know how many people watching have experienced this, but the more people I kind of have told about my story, the more people have said, oh my God, that happened to me, or that happened to my friend, or whatever. But basically it was like that they completely changed their attitude to me when I came back after a year's maternity leave, and I almost didn't have a role. And it was, so far from being kind of like, corporate climber and, everything, it was like, it was like I switched my brain off within a year. And of course, you don't realize, you don't appreciate how it was like, you don't appreciate how your confidence lapses as well when you've been on maternity leave. You haven't been in the corporate world. But luckily for me, while I was on maternity leave, I decided to go on Simon Zutchi's mastermind. And I don't quite know why in hindsight, really, but a friend of mine had been on it and I went on the accelerator and my husband said, oh, you know what? You've always wanted to do this. Why don't you go on it? And I was like, why would you spend that much on training? But I did. And, the thing it gave me was the mindset. I actually thought, I can do this. I had everyone around me was doing deals, and I didn't do very much that year, but everyone around me was doing deals. It was difficult for me because I had a 3-month-old baby when I started, so I was like breastfeeding in the breaks and all that kind of stuff. But it turned the dial, and actually I went back to work thinking I need to exit, and I'm just not quite sure how it's going to happen. And as very often happens, the universe delivered. And I managed to negotiate an exit, which was brilliant for me. And at that time, I went back to work, and literally within a month, I was pregnant with my second son. So I left, and then I had like probably I bought my first HMO. So I literally had a 2-week-old baby, checking tenants in, and all that kind of stuff. And and the kind of rest is history, I guess.
No, that's really kind of like inspirational, actually. And you were determined that it was going to be successful, but also you'd obviously reignited the passion you had from earlier on in your career, because you were doing something that inspired you. But now you don't just do that, you also do some consultancy. Are you still doing some consultancy for Capita? So
so it's actually for a London borough. And I do that, and actually I really quite like keeping my hand in. So I've got to be careful with it, because the old ways come out sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I need to do a really good job at this, and I need to really work hard at it. So I have to try and keep it a bit in check. But yes, I'm working up a big development scheme for them, and it's going to be a sizable scheme. So yeah, I'm doing that, and what that gives me is access to pension funds. It gives me access to latest market knowledge that I feel I can really apply to my own investing and help other people as well. So I'm really very clued into the market because of it. So it's got loads of benefits, actually.
And on that topic, you're now a SSAS trustee yourself as well, aren't you?
I am, yes. So
it kind of fitted together nicely. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so having been a corporate slave for many years, I built up quite a nice pension pot and managed to, I guess probably about 4 or 5 years ago, actually, and I've used that for my own investing and lent it out a little bit and got it back, and struggled to get it back, actually, got it back, and then realized that actually I just want to build it myself, really. I'm not really worried about lending it out. So yeah, no, I'm it really has unlocked quite a few deals for me. So it's good.
But also as well, doing the consultancy, like you say, you're still to a degree in the thick of things when you've got that head on. So you've got access to some of the people working in that space full time still. So no doubt your friends and colleagues kind of like think of you and bring you stuff, knowing that you do your own personal stuff as well, where it's smaller schemes that might fit really nicely within your own business, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us about your business now. So you've started building your own brand, which is really great. And I also know you're doing some work, which you alluded to at the front, where you're supporting and protecting people in the industry. You're not looking to do it in volume, just so they get into the commercial space, from a good position. Because we'll talk about in a sec, things like back-to-back leases, adding value on the commercial properties, common mistakes, purchasing it wrong, and all that kind of thing can be a nightmare for many, many years if people start out wrong with commercials. So you've actually created your program to help them with this, right?
Yeah, I have. So I kind of felt like I had so much knowledge, and I kind of, I realized that that not many people have the knowledge in the space that we're in, have the kind of knowledge I have on commercials. So just kind of really set out to help a few people. I was doing a bit of one-to-one training. Then I realized that actually, I could probably help more people, and B, like, it wasn't a very efficient use of time. So I've written an online course, which takes people all the way through the commercial property process. It comes with some kind of weekly mentoring as well. And yeah, I was saying to you at the beginning, I kind of, I'm not set to take over the world, but I just really want to help people do it properly and get a bit of an insight into the market. And I think I come at it from a different direction than a lot of property trainers do. I think I just think I kind of got a different type of experience. So hopefully, if I can just help people, that's a good thing.
How to create value on empty units, and how to get the tenants in there. And actually, on that note, probably the thing to start with is the back-to-back leases. So somebody's got an empty unit, and how, with your knowledge, you're able to structure it so that between their exchange and completion, with the right contact, with the right building, you can help them add value. So should we talk a bit about back-to-back leases to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Otherwise known as pre-lets. So yeah, I mean, a really great way of doing this is to, rather than starting with the property and finding the tenant, is start with the tenant and find the property. So if you, and I know that a fair few of you will be in the commercial world already, so apologies, I'm kind of teaching you to suck eggs, but the best way to find property and the best way to find tenants is through commercial agents. And your commercial agents will, if they're worth their salt, will know who's looking in the area from a tenant perspective and what they're looking for. But you can also find that out yourself through various websites. You know, there's one called the Requirement List, which is really good, that you have to subscribe to, but kind of gives you requirements in your town. You have to be a little bit careful because there is a bit of a kind of overview, you know, so you have to drill into it a bit more and call them. But basically, if you can source the property for the tenant, and then really what you need to be doing is making sure it's income producing from day one. So you basically, the same time you're buying the property, you'll be agreeing an agreement to lease with your tenant. You'll get that exchange before or on the same day as the purchase. And effectively on day one, you've uplifted your value. Obviously, what you can buy the property, you can be looking at the property first and find a tenant for it, but you need to be making sure that you're doing a lot of research on tenant demand before you do that, if that's a strategy you want to pursue. And you know, it's very, very common practice to do that in the market, and it's where the smart money is. And what it means is that obviously now I'm kind of slightly caveating what I'm about to say because the finance market's locked up a bit in the commercial world recently, but in normal markets, you would be able to you maybe about buy and bridging and refinance based on the new lease you've got in place. At the moment, lenders are a bit, especially on retail, they're being a bit difficult. They're saying that they're valuing it on vacant possession rather than on with a lease in place. So they're being a little bit awkward at the moment, but for obvious reasons. But in a normal market, you know, you can gracefully create that value uplift. And of course, the way you create value on commercial property is not by doing improvements like you do in residential. The way you create value on commercial property is by putting a business tenant in place on a lease, paying a rent. And as soon as you get that rent being paid, that can be capitalized with a yield or a multiplier to create the capital value. So,
and you know, it's really interesting what you said there, because that's not how many of the big training companies teach. They don't say about finding the tenant and then find the property. People source the property, do the conversion, and then worry about the tenant afterwards. And sometimes that's where it goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can do that, but you know, I'm a real advocate. So I'm a real advocate of two things. First one is doing your research. So I'm not really I'm not an opportunistic investor. I like to know exactly where I'm investing. I like to know what my niche is, you know, and exactly the type of property I'm looking for. I like to know what the socioeconomics I'm looking at, and you know, I like to really research it. And I suppose second, I am very, very niche, so I kind of, you know, I absolutely know what my strategy will be, and not just be scattergun in terms of opportunities. Obviously you can do that and people make a lot of money from that, so I'm not dissing it. It's just a different approach, I guess.
And it's about risk, isn't it? You know, because most of the time, if it's in a reasonably decent area, the demand has, up to COVID times, you know, and supply, you've had, you know, a strong demand, and the supply has been falling behind, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and obviously in some sectors that's still true. So, you know, if you're looking at buying industrial property or kind of in certain niche locations, even retail is the same, then it's all about that supply demand kind of tension.
To understand it more though, say for the demand in a retail area, you mentioned about the requirements list, but obviously would you also suggest that people buy and talk to local commercial agents?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, absolutely. I'm a real advocate of that. So just to give a bit of context on that, when I acquire commercial property, I would never do it without an agent, which sounds crazy because I've got lots of experience, but I don't know every market in the country. I don't know every tenant in the country, and I haven't dealt in certain markets before. So for me, it's worth every penny of paying them a fee to purchase that property if they can find me a tenant to fill the property. And often these commercial agents, they have great relationships. So not only with vendors or whatever that you're buying the property from, but also from tenants, you know, because if they're any kind of decent agent, they'll have done deals with these tenants before. So they kind of, you know, when I was in that market, you know, I used to go for piss-ups with tenants from retailers, property directors from retailers and stuff, and I knew them personally. You know, that's the relationships they have. So you know, kind of they can unlock deals much easier than even you or even I can. So, you know, it's definitely worth it.
No, that's a really, really good tip. So what are the common mistakes you see people making when they jump in there to buy these units?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of, it isn't doing enough research up front. And I think it is kind of saying, oh, that would make a good unit, and without careful thought. So I would, you know, as I said earlier, and I don't want to kind of repeat, but I would definitely, what I like to do is look at the trends of what's happening in the economy, in the property market, socioeconomically, etc. I really like to follow trends and then say, okay, so this sector's struggling, but I can see an opportunity here. Then what I'll do is I'll research the town, I'll look at the socioeconomics, I'll look at websites like Property Trends, CoStar, Nimbus, things like that. I'll really kind of do some research. I'll look at the Office of National Statistics. I'll look at the local authorities' local plan. I'll speak to local agents, you know, kind of do a lot of research. I mean, it doesn't take very long. It probably takes a week or so, but I kind of, you know, you become a bit of an expert in that market, and then go in, and if it all stacks, then go in and, you know, look for the property rather than, or the tenant or whatever, whichever way around doing it, rather than kind of saying, oh, I think this might work in this location, and not really having much foundation for that. And, you know, it is all about relationships as well. So about 50 to 80% of commercial deals are done off market. So, you know, this is another reason to use your commercial agents. And, you know, they're very gregarious beings. Goodness knows what they're doing at the moment. They must be like sobbing because they can't go out for drinks and dinners and stuff, because it is a really sociable market. So, you know, to get to know people over coffees, and, you know, they will give you deals that nobody else will see. And it's only really the stuff that's left over that goes on the portals, really. Not always, that's an exaggeration, but you do get the better deals off market. So develop relationships with agents, because, you know, and get your credibility up with them, and also develop relationships with the end tenant if that's your strategy, you know. And they're very happy, so some more than others, obviously. It's all about personalities, but you can, as long as you've got a bit of credibility, they know that, you know, you're out to help them, whatever, then, you know, if you can build a relationship and say, oh, I've found this property, how about it? And they'll go, oh, that's not really right for us, but if you found it in this location, you know, and you can have those kind of chats. So I would say relationships and research. So I talk about the 3 R's in my course. So
Okay.
it's research, relationships, and routes, so exits. So it's about the exits as well. So when you go in, obviously plan your exit, and there's very specific strategies that you can pursue which have a very specific exit, certain types of people in the market who want to buy it, and always make sure that you've got kind of 3 to 4 exits sorted. So, you know, if you can't find a tenant, then can you do a conversion to resi? Can you use Class E to convert to offices, or can you use Class E to convert to health? What's the demand in those sectors? You know, just really make sure you've got your exits sorted before you.
And that's quite interesting, actually, with the new permitted development rights, which is opening up actually as a lead straight into what I was wanting to discuss with you now, which is where you see we're going to head in 2021, the opportunities, the reshaping of the high street, the secondary and tertiary parades, what you think, generally speaking, you know, might be coming up, opportunities, and how we can leverage the new permitted development rights.
Yeah, exciting times. So Yeah, well, obviously Class E is current now, so which means you can convert between the A uses apart from takeaways and restaurants and takeaways and bars, and the offices, so the B classes, B1 classes and the D1, that you can do conversion between them all. So that, I think that's exciting, because there's kind of quasi, they can all work together, and you can use property for those uses. And obviously there's a new airspace PD. Sorry, my husband's still printing. I should have given some strict instructions before I started. And yeah, so obviously there's the airspace requirements as well. PD as well, prior approval as well. Although I don't know what you think, but I think that's more like full planning, really. Like there's a lot of prior approval matters you need for that. But
and I think it's very area specific as well, because there are some areas where, like I think the London inner boroughs, places like Reading, where space is tight, if you've got the, enough strength in the roof, or if you can strengthen the roof, it could bring good opportunity. But some areas where there's, an abundance of land, where the land value is so cheap, it's probably still not going to stack up and work, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's an expensive way to build in some ways. And I know that there's lightweight modular structures you can put on top, etc. But and then obviously the government's now consulting on converting Class E to Resi, which we're all very excited about. So it's interesting because obviously retail, latterly my career was all about retail. So I've got a really deep understanding of retail. And there's a few things on that, I think. The first thing is that I doubt very much whether the government or local authorities will just say, right, all the retail in our town's up for grabs, just off you go and convert it all to Resi. If this comes in, I think what will happen is there'll be like I don't know how they'll do it, but there might be like an Article 4 direction over a certain strip of the high street, or if it comes from central government, it might be that the local authority has to zone a certain area, but it could be no wider than, I don't know. I think it's a very difficult one to put in place, actually. But I think there has to be some securing of the high street. And then basically everything else is up for grabs. And obviously local shops are protected under the new use classes. But so I think there needs to be some protection over retail, but obviously that's really good news if you're investing in retail, because it will over time bring that supply down and should push rents up as well. Because if you're restricting the supply of retail in any one town, then that's going to help. Obviously some towns and cities that have got big shopping centres that are going to be half empty, and they are difficult things to convert. They really are. And I can see I've said for ages that shopping centres are probably the best development opportunities in towns and cities, but the land values need to come down significantly. And I'm not even convinced we're there yet. I know they've plummeted, but I just don't quite think they're there yet. So, and they don't lend themselves to building flats on some do, some don't. Building flats, I think ultimately the shopping centres will be like leisure, workspace, resi space. I think they'll be amazing spaces, but I think it's got quite an evolution to go through first. So yeah, I think there's going to be some amazing opportunities for conversions. There's obviously some growth sectors, so health, and I'm talking about not just GPs and dentists, but also I'm talking about kind of chiropractors, physios, osteopaths, people like that. They can fit really nicely in upper parts of retail units, or even ground floors, etc. So I think kind of we need to be careful that it's not all about resi, because I think there's going to be loads of nice services that come in. I think there'll be a demand for suburban office hubs because of, I think people will want to work locally, but not necessarily work from home. So I think that we'll see more of those popping up on our high streets. There'll still be coffee shops, etc. I think that there'll be, yes, and there'll be more leisure moving into the town centres as well, because the land values allow that to happen. The property prices allow that to happen, because all that's been happening in the past is that prices have gone up and up and up, and it's just stopped local retailers coming in, it's stopped local service operators, it's stopped leisure coming in. And I think that we'll see a much more varied high street, which has got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
It's got to be amazing. And actually, funny you should say that. So there's a couple of things that worry me. One of them is obviously the rates cost, that's got to be addressed, because that in itself is what's also put a lot of people off. Even if they get a rent-free period, the rates are just crazy in some areas, particularly where I invest, for example.
Yeah.
And then parking's the other challenge, or accessibility. The cost to get in if you park out of town and use, say, a bus, that's something else they need to address. How they actually transport people from, you know, just peripheral the city or town into the city centre.
Yeah, and you know, the government's announced their 2030 pledge on the environment, and that's just not going to happen until public transport is improved.
No, and the cost needs to be kind of like leveled out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I agree on business rates. I mean, the government is obviously resisting doing anything on business rates because it's probably the only tax that they can rely on going forward, you know, and it's the tax that's probably least contentious to the voter. So they are resisting it, but they've got to do something about it. And obviously, you know, that's going to be converting to council tax anyway if they convert them to resi. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive problem for the industry, and it has been for the last however many years. You know, it really is a problem, and obviously it's another justification why, if, as a landlord, as an investor, to get a back-to-back deal in place when you're buying a property, because obviously you don't want to be paying that. There's no empty rates. There used to be 3 months, but there's no empty rates now, so you are literally liable from day one, and it can really stack up. Having said that, though, just a bit of a top tip for everybody. I don't think people think that they can challenge their rates, but just to give a bit of context, whenever we used to get the rates bills in shopping centres, the first thing we used to do was mass appeal everything. Like, we used to bring rates advisors in and just literally have every single thing was appealed. And we used to, on more occasions than not, we used to get a reduction. So I would say to everybody, if you've got a crazy rates bill, then appeal it. And not just because you're having to pay it, even if your tenant's having to pay it, because rent is a residual of all the other fixed costs. So when a tenant is looking at a property, what they're looking at is the overall cost of occupation, and the fixed costs, things like, you know, water, gas, electric, business rates, they're fixed costs. They can't do anything, you know, staff costs, stock of cost of merchandise, etc. That is fixed costs. And therefore, if the fixed costs go up, the rent goes down because they have a fixed cost of occupation. So the more you can help a tenant reduce their fixed costs, the more they're going to be able to pay you in rent, basically.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip. And actually, going back to what you said, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this. I've got some thoughts on maybe the high street being back to how it used to be in bygone days. So lots of small independent businesses, cottage industries coming back. Certainly we have a road, it's known locally as Smelly Alley.
Nice.
And that reason is because it used to have a fresh fish shop down there. It's called Union Street, but regrettably right now it's full of vape shops. However, the local council is starting offering incentives to attract small businesses back, and we've had one just move in there that was in another local area, and it would be lovely to see kind of like greengrocers, butchers, all of that kind of thing back on the high street, mixed in with the residential. And do you feel that's what we might see more of in this new world where we're reinventing the high street?
Yeah, it's all about affordability, isn't it? And it just hasn't been affordable. So obviously what's happened is the occupiers, the tenants, the businesses that can't pay as higher rent and rates, they move to the edges because that's where they can afford it, or they move to local villages or local shops. And if the costs come down, then yes, they will move back in. And you know I really can't wait for that, because it's going to be the homogenous town centre really has been, and people like me, I'm ashamed to say, have contributed to that, because they were the people that paid the rent. They were the retailers that paid the rent. You know, you wouldn't be any kind of town worth your salt unless you had, you know, Marks and Spencer's, a Boots, a WH Smith, a Topshop, you know, rest in peace, etc. So, you know, and yeah, bringing more variety in, I think is brilliant. But again, this is all about socioeconomics. Not every town will be like this. And retailers, if they're sophisticated, they'll do some serious catchment analysis. They'll do some population analysis, customer analysis to really analyze whether it's the town to locate in for them. And if they're not so sophisticated, if they're smaller businesses, then they'll still kind of know where their customer, who their customer is, where they're coming from, etc. So, you know, if as an investor, I would always recommend doing that first R, which is the research, and just make sure that you think it's going to evolve the way you think it's going to. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. I mean, we all know the kind of nice little affluent market towns and, you know, places where, you know, they'll probably thrive over the medium term.
Well, what's quite interesting on that is going back to something you said earlier, which is on the gentrification. So I went to college for a while in Brixton, and it was as rough as dogs, right? It really was rough. But when you start looking at some of these areas now, you can see how gentrified they've become. I mean, Ealing is another example. So many people, you know, well-placed, kind of like architects, etc., see where one of the areas I invest heading towards being in Ealing in the mid to long term because of what's happening there now and the regeneration projects that are planned for the future. So like you say, it's nice because that gives you more that villagey feel, that kind of old-fashioned feel where everything's not the same. You've got these individual shops and you've got things that draw people and make people want to live there. But also I think the younger generation are much more conscious of, you know, wanting things in like a brown paper bag that's, you know, good for the environment, and buying fresh rather than buying processed or buying something that's been on a long journey to get into, say, a Tesco or a Waitrose. They'd rather buy, say, from a local retailer.
Yeah.
That is serving.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, obviously we have to balance this with the online, with the rise of online, which isn't going to go away. And, you know, they call it, you know, it's called clicks and mortar, isn't it, in the kind of industry, which is kind of the merging of the physical stores and the online presence. And I don't think anybody, can I think of anybody who's doing that really, really well? There probably are some operators that are. John Lewis isn't too bad, but I don't think, you know, if you think about what will get people off their seats, off their sofas to go into town centres, it's experience, isn't it? You know, it's something that you can't get from an online shop. And you know, I've said for a while that, you know, you want shopping evenings, you want, you know, I can see with innovation, you might kind of go into a fashion store and have like virtual reality trying clothes on, or you know, a coffee shop in a clothing shop, or, you know, personal shoppers, or, you know, something more than just racks of clothes that actually are easier to browse online, and you can send them back by free delivery if they don't fit. So I think that there's definitely an onus from my perspective, and I think there has been for ages. And I don't think the economy has meant that people haven't innovated. And obviously in times like this, innovation comes through because it has to. And I think that what's going to have to happen is that I think that retailers, whether they're local or national, will have to provide more of an experience for the shopper.
Yeah, attract people there. I think you're right. And John Lewis hasn't done too bad a job. But not all John Lewis's are equal. So hopefully they'll up their game a bit more. So I've got two quite close to me. So that's rather nice.
Yeah, nice. Lucky you.
Put a tapas bar in there.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. So I'm going to switch this printer off because it's starting to get a bit too frequent. Yes. Yeah, that's a great example, actually, isn't it, of something that will and it's about dwell time for retailers as well. So I could bore you for hours about the metrics that retailers work on. You know, they go for footfall, and they measure that, interestingly, through people's mobile phones. Like they when it sends a ping out, they can work out how many people are coming past. They also do footfall counts, and then they also measure it by obviously sales, but also dwell time. So it's not about how many people are just walking past, but how long they stay in the store. And everything they try and do, the big retailers, is about trying to keep people in the store longer, so they browse and basically buy more.
Absolutely. No, that is brilliant. So lease-wise, something else I had a quick question on before handing over to Sam. lots of leases I'm hearing are being negotiated for a shorter period of time, more mum and pop type leases. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just about supply demand. And, I think it's been a very landlord oriented market for a long time, so the reason people have bought commercial property is long leases, good tenants, upward only rent reviews, full repair insuring leases, blah, blah, blah. And I think that, now there's more supply, basically. I mean, when I was negotiating deals with tenants, it's exactly the same. So it hadn't, it's nothing new. And, this was 2014, 2015. Tenants were like, well, I've got such and such a landlord in a different city who's offering me 2 years rent free, or, paying for all my fit out in the shop. So unless you do that, I'm going to do that deal first, because there's only so many deals we can do this year, acquisitions we can do this year. So, take it or leave it kind of thing. And then obviously now they're saying, well, you know what, like, because I don't want to be tight. If you're paying for my fit out, which probably for certain types of unit landlords will have to, then I'm not really tied into a unit. I could just hand it back. So I want annual break clauses. I'll take a 10-year lease, but I want annual break clauses, just in case my sales drop, to future proof myself. And, if you were a tenant, you'd do exactly the same, wouldn't you? You'd be like, let's go for maximum flexibility, so that if my trading model has to evolve or change, then I can get out of my liabilities. And the other thing, obviously, is turnover rents. And that's happening across all sectors. It's not just retail, but it's obviously more prevalent in retail. And again, this was happening 5-6 years ago, where, and I think it's going to be really prevalent now, where the retailer basically says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, you share in my success. So if I'm doing well, I'll pay you, I'll pay you a 10% of my overall turnover. So if my sales are up, you'll get more. And if they're down, you get less. And isn't that more equitable? And there's a huge debate around that.
It is. I'm just going to hand over to Sam to ask you some questions, because I know she's obviously loving this area because it's where she operates. But my concern with that would be then on the lending side.
I totally agree. Yeah. And hence why, sorry, before we hand over, hence why you need to do your research, because if you're only going to be able to get that type of lease, you better to know before you waste time and money on trying to acquire a unit and then have to get a flexible 1-year lease with turnover rents. You need to buy somewhere where there's loads of demand. And it's not just retail, don't forget, there's loads of demand for industrial property. There will be certain locations where there'll be demand for offices. There's other sectors you can go into as well, like health, etc. Make sure you target something where you can get a decent lease in place, because that is really the kind of the mainstay of the value you're going to get.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Sam, I'm guessing you've got quite a lot of questions written down.
Thanks, Suzi. It's been really interesting. What you've just said about the flexibility of the leases, for a landlord, that sounds horrific, because it's just, go into commercial, have commercial tenants as your clients for a bit more certainty than with a residential tenant. But yeah, that would be really worrying, having that sort of flexibility and up and down on how much you're actually going to be getting in a year.
Yeah, so I think we need to be really careful not to lump all tenants together. So there are certain big brands in the retail market, which were always the holy grail, weren't they? And, as investors, I don't think they are anymore, actually, because they will literally screw you over. Just because they can, and they're just being commercial. They're not being nasty about it. It's just commercial, and for me, that I am staying well clear of that kind of property. I am not interested in that at all. But, if you're looking at a really little niche in the retail market, maybe a town or a smaller town where there's a really wealthy population, they're going to be at home more because they're working from home. There's more local operators who actually just feel very lucky that they've got a unit in the town and they've been trading well or whatever, and they want to take a 5-10 year lease. You can still get good leases, but you just have to really do your research. Otherwise, you are going to, it just worries me when people are very opportunistic without doing the research, I have to say.
There's an associate of mine, and he has 3 commercial retail shops, all let to the same chain of clothing company. And he did all his research on them, so he was happy to take them on as a client. their profit margins seemed to be low, but he recognised that when he took them on. But his thought process on that was, while they're a tenant and they're paying rent, that's fine, but the opportunity was there with the buildings for future development. So even if they started failing to pay, he would be able to remove them as tenants and use it as a development opportunity. So
Yeah,
he thoroughly considered, let's keep them as tenants, let that roll. As soon as it starts failing, it can fall back into the development opportunity. So I think that's sort of a smart way of working with those sort of tenants. So you've always got, like you said, you've got those other routes to exit.
exactly. Yeah, no, I absolutely, that's really smart, you know, because it may be that they will survive and it will be fine, but yeah, always have that other exit, you know, if there's a resi alternative or other uses that would go for it, for sure. I mean, just a bit of a top tip for everyone: if you are buying a property with a tenant already in, then the absolute first thing you must do, obviously, is talk to that tenant, and do that for various reasons. First of all, find out how they're trading. If you're going for an inspection, have a look in the staff room, because quite often on the notice board, they leave their weekly sales up or their monthly sales and they forget to take it down, and you can have a little look at that and see how they're doing. But you know, even if you go in as a shopper into that shop and say just to the store's manager, how's business, you know, everything okay? And then obviously once you get further down the line, speak to the head office or speak to the owner, and just find out, you know, are they happy? You know, is trade how they want it to be? You know, because you could actually find a really, like, a lease restructuring deal from that conversation. Like, you might buy a property with a 2-year lease in place, and you say to the tenant, you know, how are you trading? Oh, we love it, and we'd love to be here for long term. You're like, oh, okay, before I buy it, how about I put a lease extension in place to give you a 10-year term? And like, wow, that'd be amazing. I've done many deals like that, and you know, then you get an uplift in value from day one again. So you know, it's you always must talk to that tenant.
That's interesting. You talked about offices and that you think they're going to be evolving and maybe not being in the prime postcodes, but maybe going to the outskirts. What are your thoughts on serviced offices?
So I think it's going to be a bigger thing than it is now. I think that, so there's a few things in offices. The first thing is there's loads of office to resi conversion. So in some locations, there's quite a lot of scarcity actually. The latest, all the COVID stuff might kind of address that in the short term, but I think longer term that will still be the case. So obviously the main serviced office providers have been like Regus and WeWork, and the model that they operate on. So Regus do own some freehold, but they also lease property, and then they have to basically, and WeWork do, they lease at quite high rents actually, and then they have to then try and get a certain number of lettings to pay for that rent. And for me, that feels like a really dangerous model, because you know, all you need is demand to dip below a certain percentage, and then you know, you're exposed. So I think there will be huge demand for serviced offices. I think corporates will have their own, where you know, local hubs where their staff can work, especially the things like the banking groups. You know, I think they will have their own local hubs. But I think there will be also more demand for service offices. And I think, you know, again, it's a great niche to get into, I would say. But again, it's about where and what you offer. I know for sure at the moment with serviced offices, they're struggling because obviously everyone sits next to each other. And that's not ideal in the current environment. But I know people who've got serviced offices where they've got separate toilets and separate kitchens and separate entrances are actually doing really well. Because people are kind of keen to get out of the house, but they just don't want to be sitting next to strangers. So I think it's definitely going to be a wave to surf that one. I think there's going to be more. There's a lot more smaller operators springing up, and actually there's one operator, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're called New Work, and they actually are working with corporates and head offices to downsize head offices and provide like suburban hubs for the workers. So you know, they literally jumped on that about 3 to 4 months ago, which I think is really smart, and I think that's definitely a model that's going to increase.
Do you think people will still want to own an office, even if it's a small one, to get you out of the house? You know, if we've all been working from home.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain industries that rely on it a bit more than others. So I think I just find it difficult to. So all teams will need to get together at some point, otherwise, you know, the social connection is going to completely go. But obviously, you can do that in a serviced office, can't you? Or you can hire an office out. So you don't necessarily have to do that. But I would suspect that corporates will keep an office presence because they like to have the address as well, etc. There's certain industries where, you know, they need to be in a business hub, like the banking industry, you know, the stockbroking industry. It's all about tips, isn't it? It's all about the network. It's all about, and, you know, surveying's the same, actually. You know, surveyors in the West End, you know, there's certain wine bars where you can basically, I dread to think how many deals have been done in wine bars. You know, it is that type of business. So I can't see those kind of businesses moving out. And in fact, I would say that surveying is one of the first, a lot of people are back in the office, or have been, prior to the last lockdown. But there's others where it's very obviously where people can work from home, and, you know, it just depends, doesn't it?
I should imagine over the last sort of 10 months there's been a lot of those garden offices being built.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love one of those. They're really nice, aren't they? You've got one. Oh, lucky you.
Oh,
You're on mute, Karen.
Mute.
Sorry, I have one, but we've turned it into a mini gym because I'm actually now hanging out in my friend's office in Reading.
Oh, nice. Lots of options.
Tell us a little bit more about this program, Suzi, that you said that you're offering, an online program. Tell us a little bit more about that. There's probably people listening in who want to get into the sort of commercial side of property more than residential at the moment.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, it's called Commercial Property Academy, and it's a 6-module online course. So it starts kind of why invest in commercial property. Then I do a really deep dive into all the different sectors of commercial that you can invest in and how the different markets work. And then talk a bit about valuation, but kind of from a perspective of kind of how you can make money by knowing about it, rather than boring you for hours about valuation, which I could if I wanted to. And then talking about strategies, and then kind of how to buy property, you know, how to build your team, how to finance, deal stacking, and then a bit about managing property and commercial leases. So it's pretty comprehensive. What it isn't is a commercial to resi course. So we do touch on commercial to resi because obviously it's a very clear strategy that you can employ, but it's not a commercial to resi course. You know, that I'm a commercial expert. So yeah, and then once a week I do, there's a closed Facebook group. Once a week I do an hour, up to an hour's mentoring, which is about, you know, either answering questions from people I'm training, or just talking about a topic or something happening in the market. So yeah, it's www.commercialpropertyacademy.co.uk if people are interested.
Okay, brilliant. And is it a course that starts at a particular week and then you do 6 weeks together, or is it a rolling?
No, you can join whenever, actually. So we released a module a week. Couple of modules are quite big, so they get released over a couple of weeks. But you can go as fast or as slow as you want, really. So yeah, it's on, at the moment it's online. I'm sure in the future I'll do something a bit more face to face, but I'm kind of trying it on for size and seeing how it helps people. And obviously, if I can help people more, I'll do something else in the future. Yeah,
sure. Thanks for mentioning the website. Perhaps put that into our page. So if somebody wants to find out any more about it, then they can. That would be great.
Great, thank you.
You said that you started your property journey juggling a couple of babies. I'm sure there's people who are listening who are parents who, you know, want to get started or are trying to juggle all of that, and it is a challenge, especially in the last year with kids being at home from school and things. So what's your sort of tips on how you managed to do that? Because they were very young when you were starting. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to give tips on that. I'm not sure I cope very well, honestly. Yeah, so especially
in the last year with kids being at home. Put that on silent, Karen.
So yeah, what did what tips have I got? Well, I would just say that, first of all, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, I think I was really tough on myself. And, you know, the trouble is when you go on a program like the Mastermind program is that, you know, you get encouraged to do 5 deals in a year and, you know, be financially free and all that kind of stuff. And I was massively hung up on that and really beating myself up because I wasn't doing it. And then took a very good friend to take me aside for, you know, for a piece of cake and a cup of tea, just to say, look, come on, you've got two children under 2, kind of give yourself a bit of a break, kind of thing. So I think, yeah, you just got to be a bit kind to yourself, I think, because, you know, they are tough years, and I found them very tough. And I think I found them tougher because I was chomping at the bit to get going. And I would say with my second, I'd kind of been through the rounds with one, so I'd kind of been through that phase. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love him to bits, but I was kind of quite keen for the baby phase to speed up a bit, because I was like quite keen to like kind of get on with life in a way. And that sounds hateful because I love him so much, but you know what I mean. It's kind of so yeah, I think honestly I'm really not best placed because I don't think I cope with it very well. But I would just say really try and be kind to yourself, because and try and enjoy it. You know, like you can run them side by side, but I would say now mine are 5 and 7 now. And I would say this last year, in fact, not this last year because of COVID, but kind of this school year starting in September is the first year that I genuinely feel that I can go at full throttle with my businesses, because you know they kind of need you, and I wanted to see them. And I was taking, like, I only work part-time, and I was spending, you know, now they're both at school and they're kind of getting more independent, they don't really want mummy around that much, then actually it's so much easier to really just go for it. So yeah, I mean, and I just wasn't expecting it to take that long, honestly, but you know, it kind of has. So yeah, just be kind.
Well, those first foundation years, they whiz by so quickly, don't they? So
yeah, they do. And I don't regret a second. You know, I was there for every school play, everything, and you know, I was spending time with them and stuff. So you know, that's got its own pleasures as well.
Yeah. So do you manage your resi investment business yourself now, or have you outsourced that?
So yeah, I don't really like managing it them. So yeah, so I work with JV. I work with a couple of really great JV partners, and I've also got managing agents as well, which doesn't obviously make it as profitable, but it's yeah, for me, like I'm best served building the businesses rather than kind of managing property. That's my personal view.
No, I think that's wise, and especially after the comment you've just said about the kids, that you don't want to be faffing around with tenants. If you can outsource that, when you know you've got the children need you more than your tenant does. That could be,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they've only got one mummy.
Yeah.
And just going back to the SSAS funds, so you've got your own SSAS pension and you're using that for purchasing property. And you said also you've got access to funds. So is that part of your who you're doing your SSAS administration with? Is that how you're enabling that? How's that work?
So yeah, so I kind of use my own SSAS pension, and then I do work with investors as well. So yeah, whether they're SSAS trustees or kind of just investors, I'm very kind of, you know, I like to have quite close relationships with investors. So I'm not one of these people that that has lots and lots and lots of investors. I kind of like to get to know people, and you know, want them to trust me and I want to trust them, etc. So
and the beauty of that is that it enables you to build your portfolio quicker than if you were just saving up for the funds for the equity each time, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it does. And you know, you think 2021, I can really see, you know, I'm going to be buying commercial in 2021, and I've got some quite big deals lined up, and I just can really see it's the year to maximize on the market. So for me, you know, kind of it is going to be a deals year next year, touch wood. Hopefully nothing else like COVID hits next year, so we'll see.
That's been really enlightening, all your wealth of knowledge there has been amazing. So I'm sure there'll be some questions in the chat box. We'll have a look at those throughout the day, and if you've got time to look at them today, then that'd be great, and answer them. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. And yeah, if you want to tag me in into any questions, I'll look at them and I'll answer them later.
Yeah, awesome.
No, that's been absolutely amazing, Suzi. Really appreciate all the nuggets you've shared. Lots of positive feedback there as well. I've actually dropped your Strongoak Investments link in there and your Commercial Academy.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, so I've put those in there, and it's been absolutely lovely hearing about what you're doing and the nuggets you shared. Really appreciate. Now, I know you've got to head off because you've got a meeting at 10:30. But yeah, thank you so much for, allocating this time for us to share your nuggets. Really great, Suzi, and catch up with you soon.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for having me, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, and bye, everyone.
Bye.